A gunshot echoed through the quiet streets of Silverton, Colorado, as Vivian Daniels pressed her back against the cold brick wall of the alley, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might burst from her chest. The year was 1878, and she had never felt more alone or more terrified. The footsteps pursuing her grew louder, accompanied by the jeering voices of men who had cornered her like a wounded animal. Vivian clutched her reticule tightly against her chest, the small derringer inside useless with its single spent bullet. She had fired a warning shot, but that had only enraged her pursuers. "Nowhere left to run, pretty lady," called a gravelly voice from the entrance to the alley. "Might as well come quiet like." Vivian's breath came in short gasps as she retreated deeper into the darkness, her skirts catching on debris. The moon had disappeared behind heavy clouds, leaving the narrow passage between buildings pitch black. She had arrived in town only yesterday, seeking a new life after her father's death had left her penniless in Denver. Now she wondered if she would live to see morning. The three men who had followed her from the saloon, where she had inquired about work, moved into the alley like shadows, their outlines barely visible. Vivian could smell whiskey and tobacco as they drew closer. "I have nothing of value," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady despite her fear. "Please, leave me be." A harsh laugh answered her plea. "Oh, I wouldn't say that, miss. A pretty thing like you has plenty to offer." Tears threatened to spill from Vivian's eyes as she took another step backward, only to feel the solid resistance of a wall behind her. There was nowhere left to run. She was trapped. Suddenly, a match flared to life at the far end of the alley, illuminating the rugged face of a man Vivian hadn't noticed before. In one fluid motion, he lit the wick of a brass lantern, casting a warm golden glow that pushed back the shadows. The light revealed a tall figure dressed in worn trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. Without a word, the newcomer stepped between Vivian and her pursuers, setting the lantern down on an overturned crate. His movement was unhurried yet purposeful, as he placed himself squarely in their path. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, his voice low and steady. "Seems to me the lady isn't interested in your company." The three men stopped, momentarily surprised by this unexpected interference. The largest of them, a burly man with a thick beard, spat on the ground. "This ain't your business, stranger. Move along if you know what's good for you." The newcomer didn't flinch. "I'm making it my business." His hand rested casually near the holster at his hip, though he hadn't drawn his weapon. 3 against 1 lady doesn't seem sporting, even for Silverton. Vivian pressed herself against the wall, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. The lantern light revealed her savior's profile, strong jawline, weathered skin that spoke of years under the harsh western sun, and eyes that remained fixed on the threat before him. "Who the hell do you think you are?" demanded another of the men, a thin fellow with a scar across his cheek. "Name's Lucas Everett," he replied calmly. "Most folks just call me Luke." The third man, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward. "I know you, Everett. Heard tell you rode with the Texas Rangers some years back." A moment of tense silence followed this revelation. Vivian noticed how the men exchanged uneasy glances. 3-to-1 odds just got a mite less favorable, didn't they? Luke commented, a hint of wry amusement in his tone. "Now, I suggest you boys find yourselves some other entertainment for the evening." The bearded man cursed under his breath, but took a step back. "Ain't worth getting shot over," he muttered to his companions. "Wise decision," Luke said. He remained perfectly still as the three men retreated, disappearing into the darkness beyond the alley with final muttered threats. Only when their footsteps had faded completely did Luke turn to face Vivian. The lantern light softened his features, revealing a face younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 years of age, with keen eyes the color of a summer sky. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, maintaining a respectful distance. Vivian realized she was trembling, the fear and relief washing over her in waves. "No," she managed. They didn't touch me. You arrived just in time." She tried to straighten her posture, to regain some semblance of dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Everett." "Luke," he corrected gently, "and there's no debt. Couldn't rightly call myself a man if I'd walked past." Vivian nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. I'm Vivian Daniels. I arrived in town yesterday. Looking for work at Molly's saloon? He raised an eyebrow, and Vivian felt a flush of embarrassment color her cheeks. I was inquiring about a position as a singer, she clarified hastily. I'm a decent pianist as well. Luke nodded, seemingly satisfied with her explanation. Molly's particular about who she hires. Those men, he glanced toward the alley entrance. They're trouble, workers from the Silver Queen mine, best avoided. I'll remember that, Vivian said, clutching her reticule tighter. Now that the immediate danger had passed, uncertainty crept in. She had spent nearly the last of her money on the stagecoach fare to Silverton and a single night's lodging at the boarding house. As if reading her thoughts, Luke asked, Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight, Miss Daniels? I have a room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, she answered. It's just, I'm not entirely sure of the way in the dark. Luke bent down to retrieve his lantern. Allow me to escort you, then. Silverton can be confusing to newcomers, especially after nightfall. Vivian hesitated only briefly before nodding her acceptance. This man had just saved her from a fate she didn't want to contemplate. Surely she could trust him to see her safely to her lodgings. They walked side by side down the main street, the lantern light casting their elongated shadows ahead of them. Silverton was still awake despite the late hour, with light and piano music spilling from saloon doors and the occasional burst of laughter punctuating the night. You mentioned you came here looking for work, Luke said as they navigated around a muddy patch in the street. Family business? Vivian shook her head. My father passed away 3 months ago in Denver. He was a professor of literature at a small college there. The consumption took him. She swallowed the lump that formed in her throat whenever she spoke of her father. There were debts I wasn't aware of. The house, his books. Everything had to be sold to satisfy the creditors. Luke's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Daniels. Thank you. Vivian appreciated that he didn't offer empty platitudes. I saw an advertisement in a Denver newspaper that Silverton was growing and needed respectable entertainment. I thought perhaps my musical skills might be useful here. They might at that, Luke agreed. Town's changing fast with the mines bringing in new folk every day. Some looking to strike it rich, others just hoping for steady work. And you, Mr. Everett? What brings you to Silverton? Vivian found herself genuinely curious about this quiet man who had appeared from nowhere to stand between her and danger. A slight smile touched his lips. Luke, he reminded her again, I came for the same reason as most, to make a fresh start. Been working as a shotgun messenger for the stage company these past 8 months. He gestured vaguely toward the mountains looming in the darkness. Ride the route between here and Durango, mostly. They turned onto a quieter street lined with modest houses and a few small businesses, all dark at this hour. At the end of the block stood a 2-story white clapboard building with a neatly painted sign identifying it as Holloway Boarding House. Here we are, Luke said, stopping at the gate of the small front yard. Safe and sound. Relief flooded through Vivian as she recognized the building. Thank you again for your help tonight, Mr. Luke. He tipped his hat slightly. My pleasure, Miss Daniels. He hesitated for a moment, then added, If you're set on finding work as a musician, you might try speaking with Judge Thornton. His wife organizes most of the town's social events, and they've been talking about proper entertainment for some time now. Vivian brightened at this suggestion. I will certainly do that. Thank you for the advice. Luke nodded, his expression turning more serious. One more thing, those men from tonight. They might not take kindly to being interfered with. Best keep your doors locked, at least for a while. The warning sent a chill down Vivian's spine, but she appreciated his candor. I understand. Good night then, Miss Daniels. Welcome to Silverton. With that, Luke tipped his hat once more and turned to leave, the lantern light fading as he walked back toward the main street. Vivian watched him go, a curious mixture of gratitude and fascination stirring within her. Then, with a small sigh, she pushed open the gate and hurried up to the boarding house door, suddenly very eager for the safety of her rented room. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Vivian's room at the boarding house, rousing her from a fitful sleep filled with dreams of dark alleys and pursuing footsteps. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to her surroundings. The narrow bed with its clean but worn quilt, the small washstand in the corner, the battered trunk containing the few possessions she'd managed to keep after settling her father's affairs. The events of the previous night came rushing back, the frightening encounter in the alley and the quiet, steady presence of the man who had intervened. Luke Everett. The memory of his calm voice and reassuring manner brought an unexpected warmth to her cheeks. Pushing aside such thoughts, Vivian rose and prepared for the day ahead. She had precious little time to secure employment before her meager funds ran out. After washing her face and changing into her second-best dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim, she pinned her dark hair into a neat bun and descended the stairs to the boarding house's small dining room. Mrs. Holloway, a plump widow in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, was serving breakfast to the other boarders, two elderly sisters who taught at the town school and a young clerk who worked at the mercantile. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," Mrs. Holloway greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Well enough, thank you," Vivian replied, not wishing to worry her landlady with tales of her misadventure. She accepted a plate of eggs and toast with gratitude, realizing how hungry she was. "I heard you come in rather late," Mrs. Holloway commented as she poured coffee into Vivian's cup. "A young lady should be careful in a mining town after dark." Vivian nodded, taking a sip of the strong brew. "Yes, I've learned that lesson. Could you perhaps direct me to Judge Thornton's residence? I understand his wife might be able to help me find suitable employment." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows rose with interest. Indeed she might. Augusta Thornton is the closest thing Silverton has to high society. They live in the large White House on Pine Street, can't miss it. The judge also keeps an office next to the courthouse, if he's not at home. Armed with these directions and a renewed sense of purpose, Vivian finished her breakfast and set out into the bustling morning activity of Silverton. In daylight, the town revealed itself as a curious mix of frontier roughness and emerging civility. Wooden sidewalks lined the muddy main street, connecting an assortment of businesses: the general store, a hardware emporium, two competing banks, several saloons, and a millinery shop with a display of fashionable hats that made Vivian pause briefly with longing. Men on horseback wove between wagons laden with ore from the nearby mines, while shopkeepers swept their storefronts and called greetings to passing neighbors. Despite its remote location, nestled in the San Juan Mountains, Silverton hummed with the energy of a place on the cusp of transformation, from mining camp to proper town. Pine Street proved easy to find, and the Thornton residence was indeed impossible to miss. A handsome two-story house with a wide porch and carefully tended flower beds that must have required considerable effort in the harsh mountain climate. Vivian straightened her shoulders, adjusted her bonnet, and approached the front door with determined steps. A maid in a crisp uniform answered her knock, regarding Vivian with a measuring gaze before asking her business. When Vivian explained she wished to speak with Mrs. Thornton about possible musical engagements, the maid asked her to wait in the foyer while she inquired if the mistress was receiving visitors. Left alone, Vivian took in the elegant surroundings: polished hardwood floors, tasteful wallpaper imported from back east, and a crystal chandelier that must have been transported with great care over the mountain passes. The Thorntons had clearly brought a slice of civilization to this frontier outpost. "Miss Daniels, I understand you wish to speak with me about music." Vivian turned to see a tall, slender woman descending the staircase. Augusta Thornton appeared to be in her early 40s, with auburn hair showing the first threads of silver and an air of confident authority. Her silk day dress would not have looked out of place in Denver or even Chicago. "Yes, madam. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." Vivian made a slight curtsy, falling back on the social graces her father had insisted she learn despite their modest circumstances. Mrs. Thornton's expression warmed slightly at this show of proper manners. "Come into the parlor, Miss Daniels. We can speak more comfortably there." The parlor was as impressive as the foyer, featuring a Steinway piano that made Vivian's fingers itch with the desire to play. Mrs. Thornton noticed her glance and smiled. "Do you play, Miss Daniels?" "Yes, madam. Piano and I sing as well." "My father ensured I received proper musical training in Denver." "And what brings you to our little corner of Colorado?" Mrs. Thornton asked, gesturing for Vivian to take a seat on a brocade-covered settee. Vivian gave a simplified version of her circumstances: her father's death, her need for employment, and her hope to utilize her musical abilities. She carefully omitted any mention of her encounter in the alley the previous night. "I was told that Silverton is growing and might welcome someone with my skills," she concluded. "I assure you I know a wide repertoire suitable for respectable gatherings." Mrs. Thornton studied her thoughtfully. "As it happens, Miss Daniels, your arrival is quite fortuitous. The judge and I have been discussing the need for cultural refinement in Silverton. The mining operations are attracting investors from the East, men who often bring their wives and families. They expect certain standards of entertainment." Hope blossomed in Vivian's chest. "I would be happy to provide such entertainment, Mrs. Thornton. We're hosting a gathering this Saturday evening," Mrs. Thornton continued. "Several important investors will be attending, along with the more prominent citizens of Silverton. I had planned to have Mrs. Whitman play, but she's come down with a dreadful cold." She tapped her fingers lightly on the arm of her chair. "Perhaps you could demonstrate your abilities now." Vivian's heart raced with nervous anticipation as she moved to the piano. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to secure a position that would allow her to remain in Silverton. She settled onto the bench, took a deep breath, and began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that showcased both technical skill and emotional sensitivity. As the final notes faded, Vivian looked up to find Mrs. Thornton watching her with undisguised approval. "You play beautifully, Miss Daniels," the older woman said. "Would you sing something for me as well?" Vivian nodded, launching into Beautiful Dreamer, a Stephen Foster piece that had been popular for years. Her clear soprano filled the parlor, the sweetness of the melody enhanced by the room's excellent acoustics. When she finished, Mrs. Thornton was nodding decisively. "Yes, I think you'll do very nicely, Miss Daniels. Would you be available to play and sing at our gathering this Saturday? I can offer $15 for the evening." The amount was more generous than Vivian had dared hope for. "I would be delighted, Mrs. Thornton. Thank you for this opportunity." "Excellent." Mrs. Thornton rose, signaling that the interview was concluded. "Come by tomorrow afternoon to familiarize yourself with our piano and discuss the specific selections for the evening. The gathering begins at 7 o'clock. As Vivian made her way back toward the boarding house, her steps were lighter than they had been in months. $15 would extend her stay at Mrs. Holloway's for nearly 3 weeks, giving her precious time to secure additional engagements. If she could impress the Thorntons' guests, perhaps other opportunities would follow. She was so absorbed in these hopeful thoughts that she nearly collided with a man emerging from the mercantile, his arms full of packages. "I beg your pardon," she began, then stopped short as she recognized the steady blue eyes regarding her with surprise. "Mr. Everett, Miss Daniels." Luke shifted his parcels to tip his hat politely. "Good to see you in daylight, and unharmed." Vivian smiled, inexplicably pleased by the encounter. "Thanks to you, I was just returning to Mrs. Holloway's. I've had some good fortune this morning." "Oh?" His expression showed genuine interest. "Mrs. Thornton has engaged me to play and sing at their gathering this Saturday evening," Vivian explained, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "It seems your suggestion was most helpful." Luke's face brightened with a smile that transformed his serious features. "That's fine news. Augusta Thornton sets the social tone for Silverton. Her approval will open doors for you." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken when Luke glanced at the position of the sun in the sky. "I should be getting these supplies back. The stage leaves for Durango in an hour, and I'm riding shotgun." "Of course," Vivian said quickly, not wanting to delay him. "I won't keep you from your duties." Luke hesitated, then added, "The stage returns Sunday morning. Perhaps—" He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "Well, good day to you, Miss Daniels. I wish you success with the Thorntons." Before Vivian could respond, he gave a slight nod and continued down the street toward the stage office, leaving her with a curious sense of disappointment. Had he been about to suggest they meet again? And why did the thought make her heart beat a little faster? Shaking her head at her own foolishness, Vivian continued to the boarding house. She had known Luke Everett for less than a day, and romantic entanglements were the last thing she needed while establishing herself in a new town. Still, as she climbed the steps to her room, she found herself wondering if he might attend the Thorntons' gathering on Saturday. The remainder of the week passed in a flurry of preparation. Vivian visited the Thornton residence daily to practice on their piano and discuss the musical program with Mrs. Thornton. The lady of the house proved to have excellent taste and a clear vision for the evening's entertainment, light classical pieces interspersed with popular ballads and patriotic songs that would appeal to their diverse guests. Mrs. Holloway, delighted by her boarder's good fortune, helped Vivian freshen her best dress, a modest but elegant gown of deep green silk that had belonged to her mother. The two elderly schoolteachers who also boarded at the house contributed a lace collar and a pair of pearl earrings to complete her ensemble. By Saturday evening, Vivian felt as prepared as possible for this crucial performance. As the clock in her room approached 6, she surveyed her reflection in the small mirror over the washstand. The green silk complemented her dark hair and brought out the hazel of her eyes. The borrowed jewelry added a touch of refinement without appearing ostentatious. "You look lovely, dear," Mrs. Holloway said from the doorway. "Like a proper lady, not at all like some of these so-called entertainers that come through mining towns." Vivian smiled gratefully. "Thank you for all your help, Mrs. Holloway. I want to make a good impression tonight." "And so you shall." The landlady handed her a woolen shawl. "The nights get chilly up here in the mountains, even in summer. Best take this for your walk home later." With a final check of her appearance, Vivian set out for the Thornton residence, arriving 30 minutes before the first guests were expected. Mrs. Thornton greeted her with approval and directed her to the piano in the large parlor where the gathering would take place. As 7 o'clock approached, Vivian began to play soft background music while the house filled with Silverton's elite mine owners and their wives, bankers, lawyers, and several well-dressed strangers who must have been the investors Mrs. Thornton had mentioned. Judge Thornton, a distinguished man with silver-streaked black hair and an impressive mustache, moved among the guests with easy authority, introducing newcomers and ensuring glasses remained filled with fine wine or whiskey. At precisely 7:30, Mrs. Thornton nodded to Vivian, the signal to begin the formal program. Taking a deep breath, Vivian launched into Beethoven's Für Elise, the familiar melody capturing the attention of the chattering guests. As the piece concluded, polite applause filled the room, and Vivian felt a small knot of tension begin to unravel in her chest. She transitioned smoothly into a series of popular pieces, occasionally pausing to sing. During one such pause, as she prepared to begin Home, Sweet Home, the Thorntons' butler announced a late arrival. Vivian glanced up, curious, and felt her breath catch as Luke Everett entered the parlor. Gone was the trail-worn cowboy she had met in the alley. In his place stood a gentleman in a well-cut dark suit, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. Only his sun-weathered skin and the watchful set of his eyes remained the same. Judge Thornton greeted him with evident pleasure. "Everett, glad you could join us. I thought you were on the Durango run." "Just returned this morning, Your Honor," Luke replied, accepting a glass from a passing servant. "Couldn't miss Mrs. Thornton's gathering." His gaze swept the room and met Vivian's. A slight smile touched his lips as he inclined his head in greeting. Vivian returned the gesture, then quickly looked down at the piano keys, fighting an unexpected blush. "Miss Daniels, are you ready to continue?" Mrs. Thornton prompted gently. "Yes, of course," Vivian said, embarrassed by her momentary distraction. She began to play and sing Home, Sweet Home, the poignant lyrics about a wanderer longing for the comfort of home, taking on new meaning as she felt Luke's eyes on her from across the room. The remainder of the program went smoothly, with Vivian's performance drawing enthusiastic applause from the assembled guests. As she played the final piece, a sprightly rendition of The Yellow Rose of Texas, she noticed several ladies speaking animatedly with Mrs. Thornton, occasionally glancing in her direction. When the music concluded and the guests returned to their conversations, Mrs. Thornton approached the piano, her face alight with satisfaction. "You've made quite an impression, Miss Daniels," she said quietly. "Mrs. Westfield has asked if you might provide music lessons for her daughters, and Mrs. Hamilton wants to engage you for her husband's birthday celebration next month." Vivian's heart soared at this news. "I would be delighted to accept both opportunities, Mrs. Thornton. Thank you for your confidence in me." "You've earned it, my dear. Now please join the gathering. You've worked hard enough for one evening." Feeling a little awkward without the piano as a barrier, Vivian circulated among the guests, accepting compliments on her performance and answering questions about her musical training. Most treated her with polite interest, clearly accepting her as a respectable young lady rather than merely a hired entertainer, a distinction for which she was profoundly grateful. As she paused near an open window, enjoying the cool evening breeze, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Miss Daniels, you play beautifully." Turning, she found Luke Everett standing nearby, holding 2 glasses of punch. He offered one to her, which she accepted with a small nod of thanks. "Mr. Everett, I didn't expect to see you here tonight." She took a sip of the sweet beverage, using the moment to compose herself. "The judge and I have done business together," he explained. "He's assisted me with some legal matters concerning land I've purchased outside town." His eyes, warm in the lamplight, studied her with undisguised admiration. "You look lovely this evening." The compliment, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, made Vivian's cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Everett." This drew a chuckle from him. "Luke," he reminded her. "And yes, I do own clothes that aren't covered in trail dust, though I don't have much occasion to wear them." "Were you successful in your journey to Durango?" she asked, genuinely curious about his work. "Uneventful, which is always the definition of success in my line of work," he replied. "Delivered the payroll for the Silver Queen mine without incident." He glanced around the elegant room. "This is a far cry from riding shotgun on a stagecoach." "Indeed," Vivian agreed, "though I suspect your job requires its own kind of skill and courage." "As does performing before a room full of strangers," Luke countered with a smile. "I'd face down a road agent any day before playing the piano for Augusta Thornton's guests." Their conversation flowed easily, moving from music to books. Luke proved surprisingly well read for a man of his profession, to the peculiarities of life in a mining town. Vivian found herself charmed by his quiet intelligence and wry observations. Unlike many men she had met, he listened as much as he spoke, showing genuine interest in her thoughts and experiences. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Luke set down his empty glass. "May I escort you back to Mrs. Holloway's?" "The hour is late." Vivian hesitated. She had intended to ask Mrs. Thornton if one of the servants might accompany her, but the idea of walking through the quiet streets with Luke was far more appealing. "That would be very kind, thank you." After saying her goodbyes to the Thorntons and receiving her payment $15 in crisp bills that she carefully tucked into her reticule, Vivian joined Luke at the front door. The night air had grown chilly, as Mrs. Holloway had predicted, and Vivian drew her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as they descended the porch steps. "Successful evening?" Luke asked as they walked side by side along Pine Street. "Very," Vivian confirmed, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "I've been engaged to teach piano to the Westfield girls and to play at Mr. Hamilton's birthday celebration." And Mrs. Thornton hinted that there might be more opportunities to come. "I'm glad," Luke said, his tone warm with genuine pleasure for her success. Silverton could use more refinement. Too many men working the mines with nowhere to spend their money except saloons and gambling halls. They walked in comfortable silence for a time, their footsteps echoing on the wooden sidewalks. Most of Silverton had retired for the night, though light and noise still spilled from a few saloons on the main street. The moon, nearly full, cast enough light to see by, without need of a lantern. "May I ask you something, Mr. Luke?" Vivian said, as they turned onto the quieter street leading to the boarding house. "Of course. The men who confronted me the other night, one of them mentioned you had been a Texas Ranger. Is that true?" Luke was quiet for several steps, and Vivian feared she had overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was reflective. "Yes, for 7 years. I joined up in '68, right after the war, when I was 20. Left the Rangers in '75. "Why did you leave?" Vivian asked softly. He sighed, his breath visible in the cool night air. "The life wears on a man. I saw things, did things that changed me. Made it hard to recognize myself sometimes." He glanced sideways at her. "I came to Colorado looking for something different, something quieter." "And have you found it?" A small smile crossed his face. "I'm beginning to think I might have." The warmth in his eyes as he looked at her sent a pleasant shiver down Vivian's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain chill. All too soon, they arrived at Mrs. Bull Holloway's boarding house. Luke walked Vivian to the door, standing a respectful distance away as she withdrew her key from her reticule. "Thank you for the escort," she said, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. "It was much appreciated." "My pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Daniels, Vivian, I wonder if you might consider joining me for dinner tomorrow evening. There's a decent restaurant at the Silverton Hotel that serves a fine Sunday roast." The invitation, though not entirely unexpected given the pleasant tenor of their interactions, still caused Vivian's heart to skip a beat. She knew she should consider carefully before accepting. She had only just begun establishing herself as a respectable music teacher in town, and her reputation was her most valuable asset. Yet something about Luke Everett inspired trust. His quiet strength and evident respect for her made the decision easier than it might have been. "I would enjoy that," she replied with a smile. "What time shall I expect you?" Relief and pleasure brightened his expression. "Would 5 o'clock suit you?" "Early, I know, but I need to prepare for an early departure Monday morning." 5 o'clock would be perfect. Luke tipped his hat. "Until tomorrow, then. Good night, Vivian." "Good night, Luke." As she entered the boarding house and climbed the stairs to her room, Vivian felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. Between her successful performance at the Thorntons and the prospect of dinner with Luke tomorrow, she found herself looking forward to the future for the first time since her father's death. Perhaps Silverton would indeed be the fresh start she so desperately needed. Sunday afternoon found Vivian standing before the small mirror in her room, critically assessing her appearance. Her wardrobe options were limited. The green silk she had worn to the Thorntons was too formal for dinner at the hotel, leaving her with a choice between her everyday blue cotton and a rose-colored dress she had altered from one of her mother's old gowns. She decided on the rose dress, which flattered her complexion and fit well thanks to her careful adjustments. Her dark hair she arranged in a simple but elegant style, with soft curls framing her face. A touch of rosewater behind her ears completed her preparations. At precisely 5 o'clock, Mrs. Holloway knocked on her door to announce that Mr. Everett was waiting in the parlor. Taking a deep breath to calm the butterflies in her stomach, Vivian descended the stairs to find Luke standing by the window, hat in hand. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the appreciation in his eyes made her momentarily forget her nervousness. "Miss Daniels," he greeted her, his voice warm. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, accepting the compliment with a small smile. "And thank you for the invitation." Luke offered his arm, which she took, noting the solid strength beneath his jacket sleeve. They bid goodbye to Mrs. Holloway, whose expression of maternal approval followed them out the door. The Silverton Hotel stood on the main street, a 3-story structure that represented the town's aspirations to permanence and prosperity. Its dining room, while not luxurious by Eastern standards, offered white tablecloths, polished silverware, and a menu that went well beyond the standard fare of most frontier establishments. As they were shown to a table near a window overlooking the street, Vivian noticed several curious glances from other diners. Luke seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on ensuring her comfort as she was seated. "I hope this meets with your approval," he said, once they were settled and had placed their orders: roast beef for him, chicken for her. "It's not Denver, but the cook trained in Chicago, or so they claim." "It's lovely," Vivian assured him, taking in the pleasant surroundings. "I haven't dined in such a setting since before my father fell ill." Luke's expression softened with sympathy. "You were close to him?" "Very. After my mother died when I was 12. It was just the two of us." Vivian traced the edge of her water glass with one finger, memories both sweet and painful rising to the surface. He was a scholar through and through, more comfortable with books than people, but he was kind, and he made sure I received an education far beyond what most girls are offered. "He sounds like a good man." "He was." Vivian looked up, meeting Luke's attentive gaze. "What of your family? Are they still in Texas?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. My parents had a small ranch outside San Antonio. They died of fever when I was 16. My younger sister went to live with our aunt in St. Louis. I stayed to work the ranch, but it didn't survive the war." His voice held old grief, long accepted but never entirely forgotten. "I'm sorry," Vivian said softly. Understanding now why he had joined the Rangers so young, Luke shrugged slightly. It was a long time ago. Sarah, my sister, is married now with 3 children. She writes regularly. Their meal arrived, momentarily halting the conversation. The food proved excellent, as Luke had promised, and Vivian found herself relaxing as they continued to talk, sharing stories of their respective pasts and discovering mutual interests. So, this land you mentioned purchasing, Vivian said as they lingered over coffee and apple pie. Is it for another ranch? Luke nodded, a gleam of enthusiasm lighting his eyes. A modest one, at least to start. 30 acres along the Animas River, about 2 miles south of town. Good water, decent grazing land. It sounds wonderful, Vivian said, charmed by his obvious passion for the project. When will you begin building? I've already started a small cabin, just 2 rooms for now, but with plans to expand. He hesitated, a hint of color touching his tanned cheeks. I've been saving my earnings from the stage company, taking extra runs when possible. Another 6 months should see me with enough to leave the shotgun messenger business behind and devote myself to the ranch full-time. Vivian was struck by the careful planning behind his dreams. Luke Everett was not a man who left things to chance. What will you raise? Cattle? Some, yes, but I'm more interested in horses. His expression brightened further. There's a growing market for good mountain-bred stock animals that can handle the altitude and rough terrain. I've already acquired a fine stallion and 2 mares to start my breeding program. As he described his plans for the ranch, Vivian found herself increasingly drawn to this man, who combined quiet strength with thoughtful ambition. There was something profoundly appealing about his self-reliance and clear-eyed vision for the future. All too soon, their dinner came to an end. As they walked back to the boarding house in the fading light of early evening, Luke spoke of his departure the next morning. I'll be gone for most of the week, he explained. The stage company's short-handed with Patterson laid up with a broken arm, so I've agreed to cover the Durango to Leadville Run. That sounds like a long journey, Vivian commented, trying to hide her disappointment at the prospect of his extended absence. 3 days each way, with stops in between, Luke confirmed. But the pay is good and... He glanced at her, seeming to make a decision. And I'd like to invite you to see the ranch when I return, if you're willing. The invitation surprised and pleased her. I'd like that very much. They reached Mrs. Holloway's front porch, pausing in the shadows of early twilight. Luke turned to face her, his expression earnest in the gathering darkness. Vivian, I want to be direct with you. I've enjoyed your company these past 2 evenings more than I can properly express. When I return from this run, I'd like to continue seeing you with your permission, of course. His straightforward declaration, delivered without flowery sentiments or excessive promises, touched Vivian deeply. I would like that too, Luke, she replied honestly. Very much. A smile of genuine happiness transformed his features. Then, I have something to look forward to on the long ride back. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Luke reached out slowly, giving her ample time to withdraw, and took her hand in his. With old-fashioned courtesy, he raised it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Vivian. I'll call on you when I return. Good night, Luke. Safe travels. She watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the gathering darkness. Only when he was out of sight did she turn to enter the boarding house, her hands still tingling from the warmth of his touch. The week that followed was both busy and strangely empty for Vivian. Busy with her new duties teaching the Westfield girls 3 afternoons a week and preparing for Mr. Hamilton's birthday celebration. Empty because she found herself thinking of Luke far more often than was sensible for a woman who had known him less than a fortnight. Mrs. Holloway, with the intuition of a woman who had witnessed many budding romances, noted Vivian's occasional distracted moments, but made no direct comment, merely smiling knowingly when Vivian asked if the Friday stage had arrived on time. Right on schedule, the landlady confirmed as they washed dishes together after the evening meal, and Mr. Everett looked no worse for wear, though I imagine he'll be glad of a proper rest after such a long journey. Vivian tried to appear only casually interested in this information. I'm sure he must be tired. Mrs. Remy Holloway handed her a plate to dry. I expect he'll be calling tomorrow, once he's had a chance to make himself presentable. The prediction proved accurate. Shortly after 10 o'clock the following morning, Luke appeared at the boarding house door, freshly shaven and dressed in clean trail clothes rather than his usual work attire. His face brightened visibly when Vivian greeted him in the parlor. "You're looking well," she said, genuinely pleased to see him. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned the stage arrived safely yesterday." It did, though not without some excitement near Tennessee Pass. At her questioning look, he added, "Nothing serious, just a broken wheel that delayed us for a few hours while repairs were made." Vivian noticed that he downplayed what must have been a potentially dangerous situation, but chose not to press for details. "And the ranch? Were you able to check on it upon your return?" "First thing this morning," Luke confirmed, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "The cabin's coming along well. In fact, that's partly why I'm here. I wondered if you'd like to see it today. The weather's fine for a ride." The invitation, though expected given their previous conversation, still sent a flutter of anticipation through Vivian's chest. "I'd love to, but I should warn you that it's been some time since I've been on horseback." Luke smiled reassuringly. "I've brought a gentle mare that would suit even the most cautious rider, and it's not far less than an hour at an easy pace." After confirming with Mrs. Holloway that she would be back well before the evening meal, Vivian donned her bonnet and joined Luke outside, where two horses waited patiently at the hitching post. One was a sturdy bay gelding that she assumed was Luke's regular mount, the other a pretty sorrel mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy," Luke said, helping Vivian mount. "One of my first purchases for the ranch. She's got a sweet disposition and steady gait." Vivian settled into the saddle, grateful that the mare seemed as gentle as promised. It had indeed been years since she had ridden regularly, not since her father sold their horses to help pay for medicine during his illness. They set off at a leisurely pace, Luke keeping Daisy close to his gelding as they made their way through town and then south along the winding road that followed the Animas River. The day was gloriously clear, with the kind of deep blue sky that seemed unique to the high country. Aspens lining the riverbanks had just begun to show hints of gold, though autumn was still weeks away. Vivian soon remembered the rhythm of riding, her initial stiffness giving way to a more natural seat. Luke noticed the change and smiled approvingly. "You're a natural horsewoman," he commented. "Daisy approves." "My mother taught me to ride when I was very young," Vivian explained. "She grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania and believed every girl should be comfortable on horseback." "A wise woman." Luke guided his mount around a bend in the road, then pointed ahead. "We're nearly there. See that clearing just beyond the cottonwoods?" Vivian followed his gesture and caught sight of a partially constructed cabin nestled on a gentle rise above the river. As they drew closer, she could appreciate the beauty of the location sheltered by hills to the north, with meadowland stretching south and east, and the river providing a natural boundary to the west. They dismounted near the cabin, and Luke tied the horses to a hitching post before offering Vivian his hand. "It's still rough," he warned as he led her toward the structure, "but I hope you can see its potential." The cabin, though incomplete, already showed signs of careful craftsmanship. The logs were neatly notched and fitted, the roof nearly finished, and glass windows, a luxury in many frontier dwellings, were installed on either side of the door. "Did you build this yourself?" Vivian asked, impressed by the solid construction. "With some help from friends on the larger tasks," Luke acknowledged. "Judge Thornton's son Thomas is handy with tools, and a few of the stage company men pitched in with the roof." He showed her around the interior, which consisted of 2 rooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace and a smaller bedroom at the back. Simple furniture, some purchased and some handmade, was arranged with an eye toward practicality rather than decoration. "It's wonderful, Luke," Vivian said sincerely, turning in a slow circle to take in the details. "I can see how much thought you've put into every aspect." His pleased expression at her approval warmed her heart. "Come, there's more to see outside." He led her to a small barn where 3 horses occupied stalls, the stallion and 2 mares he had mentioned during their dinner. The animals were clearly well-bred and well cared for, approaching the fence curiously when Luke whistled softly. "This is Thunder," he said, stroking the neck of the impressive black stallion. "And the mares are Star and Blossom." He offered Vivian an apple from his pocket. "Would you like to give this to Star? She's the friendlier of the 2. Vivian accepted the apple and extended it on a flat palm to the chestnut mare, who took it delicately, her soft muzzle tickling Vivian's hand. "She's beautiful," Vivian murmured, stroking the horse's sleek neck. "They all are." "I'm hoping for a foal from each mare by next spring," Luke said, his pride in the animals evident. "The first generation of what I hope will become known as quality Everett stock." After visiting the horses, Luke showed her the rest of the property, the creek that fed into the Animas, providing year-round water, the meadow where he planned to grow hay, the natural boundary of pine trees that would shelter livestock from winter winds. Throughout the tour, his enthusiasm was infectious, and Vivian found herself envisioning how the place would look when his plans came to fruition. Eventually, they settled on a fallen log near the river to rest and enjoy the lunch Luke had thoughtfully packed: bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of sweet tea. As they ate, Vivian realized she had never felt more at ease in someone's company. "It's so peaceful here," she commented, watching the sunlight play on the rippling surface of the river. "It feels far removed from town, though it's not really that distant." Luke nodded, his expression contemplative. "That's what drew me to this particular piece of land. Close enough to Silverton for convenience, but with its own sense of sanctuary." He glanced at her. "How are your music lessons progressing?" "Well, I think the Westfield girls are bright and eager to learn, though young Amelia would rather be riding than practicing scales." Vivian smiled at the memory of the spirited 9-year-old's impatience at the piano. "Mrs. Hamilton has also asked if I might teach her son, and Mrs. Thornton has recommended me to several other families." "You've made quite an impression in a short time," Luke observed. "As of you," Vivian replied. "Mrs. Holloway says everyone speaks highly of your reliability with the stage company." A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their meal. The afternoon sun warmed the clearing, and somewhere nearby a bird called to its mate. Vivian found herself wishing they could remain in this peaceful moment, away from the complexities of town life and social expectations. As if sensing her thoughts, Luke spoke quietly. "I've been thinking about what happens when I leave the stage company." "Oh?" Vivian looked at him, curious about this shift in conversation. "Yes." He met her gaze directly. "Vivian, I've come to care for you a great deal in the short time we've known each other. I know it may seem sudden, but life out here has taught me not to waste time when someone important comes along." Vivian's heart quickened at his words. "I've come to care for you as well, Luke," she admitted softly. Encouraged by her response, he continued. "When I've completed my time with the stage company and can devote myself to the ranch full time, I'd like to court you properly with the intention of making a life together. If you're willing." The directness of his statement took Vivian's breath away, yet she found herself responding to his honesty with her own. "I would be open to that possibility," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "But you're right that we've known each other only a short time. Perhaps we should allow ourselves the chance to be sure." Luke nodded, respect evident in his expression. "That's fair and wise. I don't mean to rush you, Vivian. I only wanted you to know my intentions are serious." He reached out slowly and took her hand in his. "May I write to you when I'm away on the longer routes, and call on you when I'm in town?" "I would like that very much," she replied, a warm happiness spreading through her at the gentle pressure of his fingers entwined with hers. They remained by the river for another hour, talking of their hopes for the future and discovering more of the common ground that had drawn them together despite their different backgrounds. When the sun began to dip toward the western mountains, Luke reluctantly suggested they start back to town. The ride back was as pleasant as the outward journey, with conversation flowing easily between them. As they approached the outskirts of Silverton, however, Luke's expression grew more serious. "There's something I should mention before we reach town," he said, slowing his horse to match Daisy's pace. "The men who accosted you that night in the alley, I've heard they're still holding a grudge. They work the night shift at the Silver Queen, but they've been seen in town during daylight hours recently." Concern creased Vivian's brow. "Do you think they might cause trouble?" "I don't know," Luke admitted, "but it would be best if you're not alone after dark, at least for now. Most of the miners are decent men just trying to earn a living, but there are always a few who bring their rougher instincts to town." "I'll be careful," Vivian promised, touched by his concern. "Most of my teaching is during daylight hours, and Mrs. Holloway is quite strict about her boarders' comings and goings." Luke nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Just the same, I'd feel better if you'd allow me to escort you when you need to be out in the evening." "That seems a reasonable precaution," Vivian agreed, secretly pleased at the prospect of more time in his company, even as she recognized the seriousness of his warning. They reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house just as the dinner bell was ringing. Luke helped Vivian dismount, his hands lingering respectfully at her waist for a moment before he stepped back. "Thank you for today," she said, looking up at him with genuine warmth. "I enjoyed seeing your ranch and hearing about your plans for it." "The pleasure was mine," he replied, his blue eyes reflecting the same warmth. "May I call on you tomorrow afternoon? Perhaps we could take a walk if the weather holds." "I'd like that." Vivian hesitated, then impulsively leaned forward and placed a light kiss on his cheek. "Until tomorrow, then." The surprise and delight that crossed Luke's face made her bold gesture worthwhile. "Until tomorrow," he echoed, touching his hat brim before mounting his horse and leading Daisy away. As Vivian watched him ride back toward the livery stable, Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway behind her. "Had a nice day, did you?" the landlady asked, her tone knowing. "Very nice," Vivian confirmed, unable to hide her smile as she turned toward the house. "Luke showed me his ranch south of town." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "A man with property and prospects is worth considering, especially one who looks at you the way that young man does." Vivian felt her cheeks warm, but didn't deny the observation as she followed her landlady inside. The day had been a revelation, in many ways, confirming what her heart had begun to suspect, that Luke Everett might indeed be someone with whom she could build a future. The next several weeks established a pattern that brought increasing joy to Vivian's life. When Luke was in town, they spent as much time together as their respective duties allowed. Walks along the river, Sunday dinners at the hotel, and occasional rides to the ranch to check on the progress of the cabin or the horses. When his stage runs took him away, sometimes for days at a stretch, he wrote letters that revealed a thoughtful mind and a deepening attachment. Vivian's music teaching flourished as well. Word of her talent and patience spread through Silverton's more prosperous families, providing her with a steady income that allowed her to remain at Mrs. Holloway's and even set aside a small amount of savings. She also continued to play at social gatherings, becoming a fixture at the Thorntons' monthly soirees and other community events. As August gave way to September and the aspens turned golden against the mountainsides, Vivian realized that she had come to think of Silverton as home. The once strange mining town now held familiar faces and places. Mrs. Holloway's cozy dining room, the Thorntons' elegant parlor, the mercantile where Mr. Patterson greeted her by name, and most importantly, Luke's steadfast presence in her life. One crisp afternoon in late September, as Vivian was returning from teaching the Westfield girls, she noticed an unusual commotion near the stage office. A crowd had gathered, and the murmur of concerned voices reached her before she could make out what was happening. A sense of foreboding settled in her stomach as she quickened her pace. "What's happened?" she asked Mrs. Patterson, who stood at the edge of the crowd with her young daughter. The shopkeeper's wife turned, her face grave. "The Durango stage was ambushed near Cascade Creek. Shot were fired." Fear clutched at Vivian's heart. "Luke Mr. Everett, was he?" "He was riding shotgun, yes," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "They've brought him to Doc Miller's office. He was hit, but he's alive. Managed to drive off the robbers and get the stage to safety, from what they're saying." Without another word, Vivian gathered her skirts and hurried toward the doctor's small office on a side street near the courthouse. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. How badly was Luke hurt? Would he recover? The thought of losing him, just as their relationship was deepening into something precious and permanent, was unbearable. The doctor's waiting room was crowded with concerned townspeople, including Judge Thornton and the stage company manager. They made way for Vivian when she entered, the judge placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He's going to be all right, Miss Daniels," Thornton assured her. "Took a bullet in the shoulder, but Doc says it missed anything vital. Everett's too stubborn to let a little lead slow him down." Relief weakened Vivian's knees, and she sank gratefully into a chair the judge offered. "May I see him?" "Doc's finishing up now. Said we can go in one or two at a time once he's done." The judge studied her with kind understanding. "You care for him a great deal, I think." It wasn't a question, but Vivian answered anyway. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Thornton nodded approvingly. "He's a good man, one of the best I know. and if the way he speaks of you is any indication, the feeling is mutual." Before Vivian could respond, the door to the examination room opened and Dr. Miller emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. He was a tall, thin man with spectacles and a perpetually serious expression that now softened as he saw the anxious faces turned toward him. "He'll make a full recovery," the doctor announced. The bullet passed clean through the fleshy part of the shoulder. No bone damage, no major blood vessels hit. He's lost some blood and will be weak for a few days, but with proper rest and care, he should be back to normal within a few weeks. Murmurs of relief swept through the room. The stage company manager stepped forward. "When can he return to work, Doc?" Dr. Miller frowned. "Not for at least a month, possibly longer. That shoulder needs time to heal properly, or he risks permanent damage. He can't be bouncing around on a stagecoach or handling a shotgun until then." The manager looked displeased, but nodded acceptance of the doctor's verdict. Vivian, meanwhile, had risen from her chair, her concern for Luke outweighing her usual reserve. "May I see him now, doctor?" Miller glanced at her, his expression softening further. "Are you family, Miss Daniels?" "No, but—" "She's as good as," Judge Thornton interjected, "and Everett will rest easier for seeing her, I'd wager." The doctor hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Very well. But just for a few minutes. He needs rest more than anything right now." Vivian followed Miller into the examination room, steeling herself for what she might find. Luke lay on a narrow bed, his upper body bare, except for the bandages wrapped around his left shoulder and chest. His face was pale beneath his tan, his eyes closed, but his breathing seemed steady and even. "Mr. Everett," the doctor said, his voice deliberately loud. "You have a visitor." Luke's eyes opened slowly, focusing with visible effort. When he saw Vivian, a smile touched his lips despite the pain evident in his expression. "Vivian," he murmured, "you shouldn't see me like this." She moved to his side, taking his right hand in both of hers. "Don't be ridiculous. Of course I should be here." Her voice wavered slightly despite her attempt at a light tone. "You gave us quite a scare, Luke Everett." "Didn't plan on it," he replied, his voice stronger than she had expected. "They came out of nowhere, 3 men with bandanas covering their faces. Knew exactly when the payroll would be coming through." His brow furrowed in frustration. "I should have been more alert." "You drove them off and got everyone to safety," Vivian reminded him gently. "That's what matters." Luke's fingers tightened around hers. "The doctor says I can't work for a month." "Then you'll rest and recover," she said firmly. "The stage company can manage without you for a few weeks." A shadow crossed his face. "The cabin's not finished. The roof on the barn needs work before winter. And there's hay to cut." He tried to sit up, wincing as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "Lie still," Vivian ordered, placing a restraining hand on his uninjured shoulder. "You'll do yourself more harm than good." Dr. Miller, who had been observing from near the door, cleared his throat. "Miss Daniels is right. You need to rest, Mr. Everett. No exertion for at least 2 weeks, and even then, you'll need to be careful with that shoulder." Luke subsided against the pillows, though frustration still showed in his eyes. "Where will I stay? Mrs. Peterson's boarding house is no place for an invalid." "You can stay at the ranch," Vivian suggested impulsively. "I could help care for you there. Mrs. Holloway would surely understand if I spent my days there, returning to the boarding house in the evenings." Luke looked at her in surprise. "I couldn't ask that of you, Vivian. You have your teaching responsibilities." "Most of which are in the mornings," she countered. "And I'm sure arrangements can be made for a week or 2. The important thing is that you recover properly." Dr. Miller nodded thoughtfully. "The suggestion has merit. Fresh air would be beneficial, and the ranch is close enough to town that I could check on you regularly." He gave Vivian an assessing look. "But it would be a significant responsibility, Miss Daniels. Mr. Everett will need help with everything from dressing to preparing meals for the first few days at least." Vivian met the doctor's gaze steadily. "I'm not afraid of hard work, doctor, and I care deeply for Luke. I want to help him recover." The sincerity in her voice must have convinced Miller, for he nodded. "Very well. I'll keep him here tonight for observation, but if all goes well, he can be moved to the ranch tomorrow. I'll speak with Judge Thornton about arranging transportation." "Thank you, doctor," Vivian said, then turned back to Luke. whose expression had softened into something like wonder as he looked at her. "Don't worry about anything. Rest now, and we'll sort everything out tomorrow." Luke's fingers squeezed hers once more. "You're remarkable, Vivian Daniels," he murmured, his eyes already growing heavy with the effects of the laudanum the doctor had administered. "Absolutely remarkable." As his eyes closed and his breathing deepened into sleep, Vivian gently placed his hand back on the bed and rose to leave. Whatever challenges lay ahead in caring for him, she would meet them. For in the moment of hearing about his injury, she had realized with perfect clarity that she loved Luke Everett, and nothing was more important than helping him heal. The following morning brought a flurry of activity as arrangements were made for Luke's care and transportation to the ranch. Judge Thornton provided his personal carriage, equipped with extra cushions to make the journey as comfortable as possible for the injured man. Dr. Miller prepared detailed instructions for changing bandages and monitoring for signs of infection, along with bottles of laudanum for pain and willow bark tea for fever. Mrs. Holloway, far from being dismayed by Vivian's plan to spend her days at the ranch, proved unexpectedly supportive. "I was a nurse during the war," she revealed as she helped Vivian pack essentials. "I know what's needed for a healing body and heart." Her knowing look made Vivian blush, but she didn't deny the implication. The Westfield and Hamilton families readily agreed to temporarily reschedule Vivian's music lessons to accommodate her new responsibilities. Mrs. Thornton even sent over one of her kitchen maids, Maria, to help with cooking and laundry at the ranch for the first week, an act of generosity that brought tears to Vivian's eyes. By noon, everything was in place. Luke, pale but determined, was settled in the carriage with Dr. Miller beside him. Vivian and Maria followed in a wagon loaded with supplies, food, linens, medicines, and the personal items Vivian would need during her days at the ranch. The journey, though short, clearly taxed Luke's limited strength. By the time they reached the cabin, his face was drawn with pain, and a sheen of sweat covered his brow, despite the cool autumn air. Dr. Miller administered another dose of laudanum before helping him into the cabin and onto the bed that Vivian and Maria quickly made up with fresh sheets. "Rest now," Miller instructed as Luke's eyelids grew heavy with the effects of the medication. "Miss Daniels will be here if you need anything, and I'll return tomorrow to check your wound." Once Luke was settled, the doctor took Vivian aside to review his instructions once more. "The main concerns are infection and fever," he explained. "Change the bandages twice daily and watch for any unusual redness or drainage. If he develops a high fever or the wound begins to smell, send for me immediately." Vivian nodded, committing every detail to memory. "I understand, doctor. I won't leave him unattended." Miller's stern expression softened. "I believe you'll take excellent care of him, Miss Daniels. Just remember to take care of yourself as well. You'll be no help to him if you become exhausted." After the doctor departed, Vivian and Maria set about organizing the cabin for Luke's convalescence. The main room was arranged to serve as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with everything placed for maximum convenience. Fresh water was brought from the well, the fireplace laid ready for the increasingly cool nights, and simple meals prepared that could be easily reheated. Thomas Thornton, the judge's son, arrived mid-afternoon with 2 friends to tend to the horses and check the property. They promised to return daily to handle the heavier chores and continue work on the barn roof, relieving one of Luke's main concerns. By evening, a routine was beginning to take shape. Maria prepared a light supper, while Vivian helped Luke sit up to take some broth and bread. Though still groggy from the laudanum, he was alert enough to express his gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for all this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never expected such kindness." Vivian smiled as she held the cup of broth to his lips. "You would do the same for anyone in need. The whole town knows that." "Not the same," he murmured, his blue eyes intent on her face despite his weariness. "This is different." She knew what he meant, that the care between them had grown into something deeper than mere kindness or friendship. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It is different." As sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks outside the cabin window, Maria prepared to return to town with Thomas, who had offered to drive her back to the Thorntons' house. "I'll return tomorrow morning, Miss Daniels," the maid promised. "Judge Thornton said I'm to help here as long as needed." "Thank you, Maria." "I'm very grateful." Vivian walked her to the door, then turned to Thomas. "And please convey my thanks to your parents for their generosity. I don't know how we would manage without such help." The young man nodded, his expression serious. "Pa thinks highly of Everett, says he's the kind of man who makes the frontier worthwhile." He glanced past Vivian to where Luke lay resting. "Tell him the boys and I will have the barn roof finished by the end of the week. One less thing for him to worry about." After they departed, Vivian secured the cabin door and returned to Luke's bedside. The laudanum had taken full effect, and he was sleeping deeply, his breathing steady and even. In repose, the lines of pain were smoothed from his face, making him look younger and surprisingly vulnerable. Vivian gently placed her hand on his forehead, checking for signs of fever. Finding none, she adjusted his blankets and then settled into a chair she had placed near the bed. Outside, the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, and stars began to appear one by one. As night settled over the ranch, Vivian found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led her to this moment, from the frightening encounter in a dark alley to sitting vigil beside the bed of a man who had come to mean everything to her. It was not the life she had imagined for herself when she'd boarded the stagecoach to Silverton, desperate and alone. It was, in many ways, something far better. With that thought warming her heart, Vivian leaned back in her chair, prepared to watch over Luke through the night ahead. The first week of Luke's recovery passed in a blur of bandage changes, medication schedules, and gradually increasing periods of wakefulness. Dr. Miller visited daily, expressing satisfaction with Luke's progress and Vivian's nursing skills. The wound showed no signs of infection, and Luke's natural strength reasserted itself as the initial shock of the injury faded. By the beginning of the second week, Luke was able to sit up for longer periods and even take short, supported walks around the cabin. His frustration at his limitations remained evident, but he bore his convalescence with stoic patience, especially when Vivian was nearby. Maria continued to come each day to help with cooking and cleaning, returning to town each evening with whoever had come to tend the animals and work on the property. Thomas Thornton and his friends had made good on their promise, completing the barn roof and cutting hay from the meadow before the first frost could damage it. On a particularly fine afternoon, when autumn sunlight bathed the clearing in golden light, Vivian helped Luke to a chair on the small porch she had insisted on having built as a surprise for him during his most bedridden days. "This is perfect," he said appreciatively as he settled into the sturdy rocker that Judge Thornton had sent out from town. "You've thought of everything." Vivian smiled, taking the second chair beside him. "I wanted you to be able to enjoy the beautiful weather. Dr. Miller says fresh air and sunshine are the best medicine." They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the play of light and shadow across the meadow. A gentle breeze stirred the golden leaves of the aspens along the riverbank, occasionally sending a few drifting to the ground in lazy spirals. "I've been thinking," Luke said eventually, his voice thoughtful, "about the future." Vivian glanced at him, noting the improved color in his face and the clarity in his eyes. "What about it?" "This injury has changed my plans somewhat." He flexed his left hand experimentally, wincing slightly at the pull on his healing shoulder. "Doc Miller says I'll regain full use of the arm, but it'll be months before I can return to the stage company. By then, my replacement will be established on the routes." "Are you concerned about the loss of income?" Vivian asked, knowing how carefully he had budgeted for the development of the ranch. Luke shook his head. "Not as much as I might have been. The stage company is paying compensation for the injury, since it happened in the line of duty. And Judge Thornton approached me about purchasing some of my horses for his son's new freight business. Between those things, I should have enough to complete the cabin and see the ranch through winter." "That's wonderful news," Vivian said, genuinely relieved. She had worried about the financial implications of his injury, knowing how independent he was. "There's more," Luke continued, shifting slightly to face her more directly. "This time here, with you caring for me, it's made me realize what truly matters, Vivian." Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. "And what is that?" "Having someone to share your life with. Someone who stands by you in difficult times as well as good ones." His eyes, blue as the October sky above them, held hers steadily. "Someone like you." Vivian felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Luke, let me finish," he said gently. I know this isn't the most romantic setting, and I'm hardly at my best, but I can't wait any longer to tell you what's in my heart." He reached across the space between their chairs to take her hand in his. "I love you, Vivian Daniels. I think I began to fall in love with you that night in the alley when you faced danger with such courage. Every day since has only deepened those feelings." Tears of happiness pricked at Vivian's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easily now that they were finally spoken aloud. "I think I realized it fully when I heard you'd been hurt. The thought of losing you was unbearable." Luke's fingers tightened around hers. "I don't have much to offer yet. The ranch is still developing, and this cabin is hardly the kind of home you deserve. But if you're willing to build a life with me, I promise to work every day to make it worthy of you." "Oh, Luke," Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not about what you can offer materially. It's about who you are, your strength, your kindness, your integrity. That's what I love." A smile of such pure happiness transformed Luke's face that Vivian's breath caught in her throat. Still holding her hand, he carefully rose from his chair and, to her astonishment, lowered himself to one knee before her. Then, "Vivian Daniels, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" "Not right away," he added hastily, "but when I'm fully recovered and can properly provide for you." Vivian didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, joy making her voice tremble. "Yes, I will marry you, Luke Everett, whenever and however you wish." With their hands still joined, Luke drew her gently to her feet and into a careful embrace, mindful of his healing shoulder. When their lips met for the first time, Vivian felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The kiss was tender and sweet, a promise of all the love they would share in the years to come. From that day forward, their lives took on a new rhythm and purpose. As Luke continued to recover, Vivian divided her time between her teaching duties in town and helping at the ranch. Their engagement became official when Luke presented her with a simple gold band, set with a small pearl, his mother's ring, preserved through war and wandering for this moment. Mrs. Holloway, after initial concerns about propriety, became their strongest supporter, especially when they set their wedding date for Christmas Day, giving them time to prepare both the ranch and themselves for married life. Judge Thornton offered to perform the ceremony, and Mrs. Thornton insisted on hosting the reception at their home. "Silverton needs more occasions for joy," she declared, "and more examples of the kind of solid partnerships that build communities." As the wedding day approached, the cabin was transformed. A second bedroom was added, the interior walls were chinked and whitewashed, curtains sewn by Vivian brightened the windows, and furniture crafted by a skilled carpenter in town made the space both functional and comfortable. Luke, now able to use his arm for lighter tasks, worked alongside the hired help, determined to create a home worthy of his bride. On Christmas morning 1878, snow fell gently outside the Thornton residence as Vivian Daniels and Lucas Everett exchanged their vows before a gathering of friends who had become like family. Vivian wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Thornton had helped her select from a catalog, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding gown. Luke, fully recovered save for occasional stiffness in cold weather, stood tall in a new black suit, his face alight with pride and love as he pledged his life to hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Thornton declared, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the crowded parlor. "Mr. Everett, you may kiss your bride." As Luke's lips met hers, amidst the applause and well wishes of their friends, Vivian felt the culmination of a journey that had begun in darkness and fear, but had led to light and love. From that first moment when Luke had lit a lantern in a dark alley and stood between her and danger, their paths had been destined to join. Later, as they rode through the snow-covered landscape toward the ranch, their home now Luke drew the wagon to a halt at the crest of a small rise overlooking the property. In the fading light of the winter afternoon, the cabin windows glowed with welcoming warmth, smoke rising from the chimney in a straight column against the darkening sky. "Welcome home, Mrs. Everett," Luke said softly, his arms secure around her shoulders. Vivian leaned into his embrace, contentment filling her heart as she gazed at the scene below. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Everything I could have wished for." As they continued down the slope toward their future together, Vivian silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her to Silverton and into that dark alley on a summer night. For in finding danger, she had also found the love of her life, a love that would sustain them through all the seasons to come. 5 years later. 1883. The sound of a piano filled the Everett home on a warm June afternoon, the melody of Beautiful Dreamer floating through open windows to the garden where 3-year-old Elizabeth played with her wooden blocks. From his position mending a fence near the barn, Luke paused to listen, a smile touching his lips as his wife's clear soprano joined the piano notes. 5 years had transformed the modest cabin into a proper home. A second story had been added the previous summer, providing 2 additional bedrooms and space for Vivian's prized piano, which Luke had ordered from Denver as a surprise for their 2nd anniversary. The garden, Vivian's special project, burst with early summer blooms, and the orchard they had planted together was beginning to bear its first fruit. The ranch itself had prospered beyond their early hopes. Luke's breeding program had produced horses that were gaining recognition throughout Colorado and beyond for their sure-footedness on mountain trails and endurance over long distances. What had begun with 3 animals had grown to a herd of 20, with more foals expected before summer's end. Vivian had continued teaching music, though now students came to the ranch for lessons 3 afternoons a week, rather than her traveling to town. Her reputation had grown to the point that families from as far as Durango occasionally sent children to board with the Everetts for intensive instruction. Elizabeth's birth 3 years earlier had been the crowning joy of their marriage. The little girl had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, along with a spirit of independence that both amused and occasionally alarmed her parents. "Papa, look!" Elizabeth called, pointing skyward where an eagle soared on thermal currents above the valley. Luke set down his hammer and crossed to where his daughter stood, lifting her onto his shoulders for a better view. "That's a golden eagle, sweetheart. See how big his wings are?" "Big bird," Elizabeth agreed solemnly, her small hands clutching her father's hair for balance. The piano music paused, and moments later Vivian appeared in the doorway, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach, where their 2nd child was growing. At 5 months along, she glowed with the same radiant health she had enjoyed during her first pregnancy. "Are you 2 bird watching again?" she called, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "Eagle, Mama," Elizabeth announced proudly. Luke walked toward the house, his daughter still perched on his shoulders. "We're studying natural history," he explained with a grin. "Very educational." Vivian laughed, the sound as sweet to Luke's ears as any music she played. "Well, professors, your tea is ready, and we have a visitor coming up the road." Luke turned to look where she indicated, recognizing the approaching rider as Thomas Thornton. In the years since he had helped during Luke's recovery, Thomas had established a successful freight business and recently been elected to the town council, following in his father's civic-minded footsteps. "Down, Papa," Elizabeth requested, and Luke swung her carefully to the ground, watching as she ran to her mother with the boundless energy of childhood. Vivian scooped her up, balancing the girl on her hip with practiced ease. "Shall we see what Mr. Thornton wants?" They walked together to meet the visitor, who dismounted with a friendly wave. "Afternoon, Everetts. Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Luke assured him, extending a hand in greeting. "We were just about to have tea. Join us?" Thomas accepted the invitation with alacrity, following them to the shaded porch where Vivian had set out refreshments. As they settled into comfortable chairs, Elizabeth climbing onto her father's lap with a picture book, Thomas explained the purpose of his visit. "The town council is organizing Silverton's 10th anniversary celebration," he said, accepting a cup of tea from Vivian. "We're hoping to make it quite an event parade, speeches, dance, the works. Mrs. Thornton suggested you might be willing to perform, Vivian, perhaps with some of your advanced students." "I'd be honored," Vivian replied, her expression brightening with interest. "When is the celebration planned?" "August 12th. That gives us about 2 months to prepare." Thomas glanced at her obvious pregnancy. "Though, if you feel it would be too taxing in your condition." Vivian waved away his concern. "Not at all. I'll be barely 7 months along by then. Plenty of time before this little one makes an appearance." She placed a protective hand on her stomach. "And I have 3 students who would benefit greatly from the experience of public performance." As they discussed details of the celebration, Luke watched his wife with quiet admiration. The shy young woman he had met in a dark alley 5 years ago had blossomed into a confident, accomplished person who balanced her roles as wife, mother, teacher, and community member with apparent effortlessness. Later, after Thomas had departed with Vivian's assurance that she would develop a suitable musical program for the celebration, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Elizabeth had been tucked into bed after her bath, her favorite doll clutched in one small hand as she drifted into dreams. "Do you ever think about that night we met?" Luke asked, his arm draped comfortably around Vivian's shoulders. She leaned into him, her head finding its familiar resting place against his chest. "Sometimes. It seems like another lifetime now." "In a way, it was," he mused. "I remember how brave you were, even cornered as you were, and how beautiful in the lantern light." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I think I fell in love with you right then, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself." Vivian tilted her face up to his, her expression softened by memories and the gathering twilight. "And I remember thinking you were the most solid, dependable man I'd ever encountered, like a rock in a storm-tossed sea." Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become second nature. "I had no idea then what happiness awaited us." "Nor did I," Luke admitted. "I hoped for a good life, a peaceful one after all the years of wandering. But I never dreamed of how complete it would feel with you and Elizabeth, and this new little one on the way." They fell silent, content in each other's company as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. From somewhere in the distance came the lonely call of a whippoorwill, answered moments later by its mate. "We've built something good here, haven't we?" Vivian said softly after a time. "Not just the ranch and the house, but a life worth living." "The best kind of life," Luke agreed, his voice husky with emotion. "One built on love and trust, day by day." As darkness settled fully over the valley, they remained on the porch, two hearts beating as one, surrounded by the home they had created together. From that fateful night in a dark alley to this peaceful evening under the stars, their journey had been one of growth, challenge, and abiding love, a love that would continue to light their way through all the years to come.